minor, largely irrelevant German princess, born into relative obscurity far from the centers of global power, managed to ascend the most coveted and absolute throne in the world. This is the central paradox of Catherine the Great, a woman who began her existence with nothing, no title of significance, no wealth, no army, and no legitimate blood claim to the Russian crown. Yet through sheer force of will and political intellect navigated a treacherous path to become the most powerful female ruler in Russian history. Her story is not merely a biography. It is a masterclass in political survival, cultural adaptation, and the relentless acquisition of power, proving that even the most insignificant pawn on the geopolitical board can, with the right maneuvers, capture the board and become the queen. If you find this story of ambition, survival, and the relentless pursuit of power as fascinating as we do, please take a moment to support our channel. Hit that like button to help us reach more history lovers. Click subscribe to never miss an episode on the Titans of History, and be sure to share this video with anyone who appreciates. It's a story of impossible odds and iron-willed determination. Your support allows us to continue bringing these incredible but true stories to life. Her life began on May 2nd, 1729, not as the Grand Empress Catherine, but as Sophie Friedrich August von Anhalt, Serbs. She was born in Stettin, Pomerania, a region that was then part of the Kingdom of Prussia. This provincial port city was a world away from the imperial grandeur of St. Petersburg. It was a fortress town, practical, gray, and austere, located on the periphery of significant European power. She was, by birth, a princess, but of a rank so minor that she was barely a footnote in the complex almanac of German nobility. Known affectionately as Feik, she seemed destined for a quiet, unremarkable life of domesticity, likely to be married off to a neighboring prince to cement a trivial border alliance. Her father, Christian August, Prince of Anhalt-Zerbst, was the definition of a dutiful servant of the state. A field marshal in the Prussian army, he was a stern, pious, and deeply unremarkable man whose loyalty lay with his king rather than the expansion of his own modest holdings. The Principality of Anhalt-Zerbst itself was a tiny, impoverished state within the Holy Roman Empire, offering no political leverage or significant treasury. His position provided respectability, but little in the way of a dowry or diplomatic weight for his daughter, leaving her future entirely in the hands of chance and the ambitions of others. The von Anhalt-Zerbst family was a clear example of Hochadel, or high nobility, in name only. They possessed ancient titles and the right to be called Highness, but their finances were perpetually strained, and their actual influence on European affairs was non-existent. They lived a life of noble poverty, maintaining a facade of aristocracy while being acutely aware of the gap between their perceived status and their grim economic reality. This lack of a substantial dowry, the primary currency of royal marriage negotiations, made Sophie a statistically unattractive prospect for the major royal houses of Europe, leaving her prospects dependent on the intricate political maneuvering of more powerful relatives. What Sophie lacked in fortune, her mother, Johanna Elizabeth of Holstein-Gottorp, possessed in relentless ambition. Johanna was a frustrated woman, disappointed in her marriage and resentful of her provincial station. She saw her daughter not as a child to be nurtured, but as a key, a single, precious tool to unlock the influence and status she craved. It was Johanna's tireless networking, her exploitation of distant royal connections, and her desperate scheming that would ultimately place Sophie on the radar of a far greater power, initiating a journey almost too incredible to believe. What if the most important invitation of your life was not a celebration, but a cold, calculated move on a political chessboard? This was the harsh reality for young Sophie. The invitation was not based on her merits, but on complex diplomatic negotiations involving Prussia and Russia. Empress Elizabeth of Russia was looking for a bride for her heir who was German. From a minor house and therefore politically non-threatening and connected to her own family's interests. Sophie was not chosen for greatness. She was selected as the least worst option, a compromise candidate pushed by Frederick the Great of Prussia. In 1744, the fateful summons arrived from the heart of Russian power. Empress Elizabeth, the formidable and suspicious ruler of Russia, was searching for a suitable wife for her nephew and chosen heir, Peter of Holstein-Gottorp. This decision was of immense consequence, as the bride would one day become the empress consort and the incubator for the next generation of the Romanov dynasty. The invitation was a political maneuver, a gamble by Empress Elizabeth to secure the line of succession with a bride she believed would be pliable, grateful, and subservient to her will. Sophie, then only 15 years old, was the candidate chosen from a short list of minor German princesses. She was not a major political player, possessing no powerful family armies to threaten Russian stability. This perceived weakness was, in fact, her greatest strength in the eyes of the calculating empress. Elizabeth wanted a bride who would be eternally grateful and pose no challenge to her authority. She saw in Sophie a safe choice, a blank slate upon which Russian interests could be written. She could not have been more wrong about the girl's internal fortitude. Accompanied by her ecstatic mother, Sophie embarked on the long, grueling journey to Moscow. This trip took weeks, crossing a continent and a vast cultural divide. As the carriage rumbled east through the snow, leaving the orderly towns of Prussia for the untamed expanses of the Russian Empire, she was not just traveling to a new destination, she was leaving behind her old life forever. She was shedding her past, her language, and her very identity. Stepping into a future she could neither predict nor control, armed only with her wits. Sophie immediately understood, with a maturity far beyond her years, that this was not merely a marriage arrangement. It was an audition for survival, to win over the Russian court, the suspicious empress, and the Russian people. The German princess had to symbolically die so that a Russian Grand Duchess could be born. This required a systematic erasure of her past and a total reinvention of self. This transformation came at an immense personal cost, forcing her to bury her own culture, her Lutheran faith, and her very name. A profound psychological sacrifice for a teenager alone in a foreign land. Unlike her fiancé Peter, who openly detested Russia, Sophie embraced her new role with a terrifying and calculated focus. She recognized that the fastest way to the heart of the people was through their language. She threw herself into her studies with ferocious intensity, sitting up late into the freezing Russian nights to master the complex Russian tongue. This dedication was so extreme that she contracted a severe case of pleurisy after walking barefoot on cold stone floors. This illness nearly killed her, leading to 16 grueling bloodletting sessions. But her demand for an Orthodox priest rather than a Lutheran one cemented her reputation for piety and dedication to her new homeland. The most crucial step of her assimilation was religious. She formally renounced her native German Lutheranism and converted to Russian Orthodoxy in a lavish public ceremony. This was the non-negotiable prerequisite for her marriage, a public declaration of her new allegiance. With her baptism, she was stripped of Sophie and given her new name, one that would echo through history: Ekaterina, Alexeyevna, or Catherine. She was no longer Sophie. She was now Catherine, sharing the name of Empress Elizabeth's own mother. A choice that bound her symbolically to the Romanov dynasty. But the fairy tale ended the moment she met her future husband. Her marriage to the Grand Duke Peter, the heir to the throne, was a cold, loveless, and immediate disaster. Peter was not a Prince Charming. He was a deeply damaged, physically frail, and childish man, utterly unfit to rule. He was an ardent admirer of Prussia, Russia's traditional enemy, and openly despised his new country. He was obsessed with playing with toy soldiers in his bedroom, enforcing rigid Prussian military drills on his servants, and showed zero interest in his intelligent and ambitious wife. One incident perfectly captures the horror of her domestic life. Catherine once entered their shared apartments to find Peter conducting a solemn execution of a rat. He had hanged the animal from a tiny gallows constructed in the center of the room because, he claimed, the rat had committed treason by chewing the head off one of his paste toy soldiers. This macabre scene was a sign of deep mental instability. Neglected, isolated, and trapped in a toxic marriage, Catherine turned to the one refuge she could find, her library. She began a rigorous program of self-education, transforming her loneliness into an intellectual crucible. She devoured the works of the European Enlightenment, reading Voltaire, Montesquieu, Diderot, and Tacitus. These were not just books, they were weapons. How do you manage to lose an entire empire in just 6 short months? Peter III provided a masterclass in political self-destruction. His incompetence was an active art form. From the moment he ascended the throne following Empress Elizabeth's death, he seemed driven to alienate every person and institution that held Russia together. His reign stands as a stark testament to the idea that inheriting a throne is one thing, but holding it requires a skill set he profoundly lacked. He behaved not as a Russian czar, but as a Prussian governor in a conquered land. In January 1762, the formidable Empress Elizabeth died, and Catherine's despised husband was crowned Tsar Peter III. His reign, lasting only 186 days, was a staggering disaster. He didn't just make mistakes, made catastrophic blunders with a speed that baffled all observers. It was as if he were actively trying to get himself overthrown, methodically checking off a list of how to infuriate a nation, from its soldiers to its priests to its highest nobles. He openly mocked Russian customs during Elizabeth's funeral, laughing while the rest of the court was in mourning. He enraged the powerful Russian army by instantly ending the 7 Years' War against Prussia. This was seen as a betrayal of blood. Russian troops had fought and died to gain significant victories against Frederick the Great of Prussia, even occupying Berlin. Peter, who idolized Frederick, not only halted the war but gave up all of Russia's hard-won territories for nothing in return, effectively spitting on the graves of his own soldiers and rendering their sacrifices meaningless. He famously toasted to the health of the Prussian king at state dinners while his generals looked on in horror. His admiration for Prussia was a personal obsession bordering on treason. He immediately forced the Russian soldiers, who had their own proud traditions, to abandon their green coats and wear ill-fitting Prussian-style blue uniforms, which they detested. He forced them to learn Prussian military drills, which they found insulting. In the eyes of the Imperial Guard, the powerful regiments that policed the capital, this was not just folly. It was a national insult that required a response. He even planned to deploy troops to fight Denmark solely to secure his ancestral lands in Holstein, a war that had zero benefit for Russia. Peter then turned his sights on the Russian Orthodox Church. He confiscated church lands, mocked ancient rituals during services, often sticking out his tongue during Mass, and attempted to force priests to dress like Lutheran pastors. He simultaneously alienated the nobility by ignoring their counsel and openly discussed divorcing Catherine, imprisoning her in a convent, and marrying his mistress Elizaveta Vorontsova. By the summer of 1762, his enemies were not just a small cabal. They were the entire nation. While the Tsar made enemies, Catherine quietly made friends. In 18th century Russia, the most important friends commanded regiments. Catherine had spent years studying people and power dynamics. She cultivated relationships, showed deep respect for the Orthodox faith, fasting strictly during Lent, while Peter feasted, and learned the names of the officers in the Imperial Guard, charming them with her intellect. She also had given birth to a son, Paul, in 1754. Securing her position as the mother of the heir, though rumors persisted that the father was her first lover, Sergei Saltykov, not Peter. Catherine knew her life was in mortal danger. Peter had publicly threatened to deal with her, and rumors of her impending arrest and imprisonment were rampant. She understood that this was a zero-sum game. She did not act first, she would be eliminated. Her survival and the survival of her son depended on her willingness to make a preemptive strike against the crowned emperor. It was a terrifying gamble that carried the penalty of death, but she had no choice. Her lover, Gregory Orlov, and his 4 ambitious brothers were her key allies. The Orlov brothers were popular, rough-and-tumble officers embedded within the imperial guard. They were respected by common soldiers and shared a deep loyalty to Catherine, who represented a favorable contrast to the unhinged Tsar. They would be the muscle behind the coup, the bridge between the Empress and the bayonets. Another key ally was the 19-year-old Princess Ekaterina Dashkova, who acted as a go-between for Catherine and the aristocracy. The plot came together with astonishing speed. While the Tsar was away at his summer palace planning unpopular military games, the Orlovs moved. They began the clandestine work of securing the loyalty of the army, distributing bribes funded by Catherine's borrowed money, and stoking resentment against Peter. The conspiracy was an open secret, a powder keg waiting only for the right spark to ignite it. On the fateful morning of June 28, 1762, Catherine woke up as a target. By nightfall, she would be the undisputed ruler of Russia. This 24-hour period was the most important of her life, where preparation met opportunity. The stakes could not have been higher: the throne of Russia or the executioner's block. The conspirators acted when one of their own, Captain Pasek, was arrested. Alexei Orlov dispatched to Catherine's quarters, waking her with the words, "It is time to rise." All is prepared. Catherine dressed quickly and rode immediately to the barracks of the Izmailovsky Guard. Upon arrival, soldiers, led by the Orlovs, immediately hailed her, swearing their allegiance not just as regent, but as empress and autocrat, their sole sovereign. The coup snowballed. Dressed in a borrowed officer's uniform, she triumphantly led 14,000 troops into St. Petersburg. The people poured into the streets, celebrating her as their savior from the hated German. The Orthodox Church officially blessed her accession in the Kazan Cathedral. It was a near bloodless coup, a popular uprising lead from the top accomplished before her husband knew what was happening. She rode astride her horse Brillante, sword in hand, looking every bit the warrior queen. Peter III, hearing the rumors too late, found his support evaporated. He was captured, isolated, and forced to sign a formal document of abdication, handing over the empire without a shot fired. His reign, begun with arrogant fanfare, ended in a pathetic document of surrender, dictated by the wife he had planned to discard. 1 week later, the deposed Tsar was dead. The official cause was hemorrhoidal colic, but the truth was murder, likely strangled by his captors. Whether Catherine ordered the assassination or benefited from an overager ally remains a dark, unresolved ambiguity. Her path to the throne was clear, but undeniably, irrevocably bloody, leaving a stain on her legitimacy she would work decades to erase. She had seized the throne by force, a usurper in the eyes of the law. Now she had to prove she deserved to rule. The challenge of governing a vast, fractured empire would be infinitely more complex than seizing power. She had to balance the demands of the conservative nobility who put her on the throne with her own progressive ideals. Catherine was aware of her status as a foreign usurper. She wanted to be a philosopher queen, legitimized by reason and the love of her people. She embarked on a mission to rebrand her reign as one of enlightenment and law, a contrast to the chaotic regimes preceding her. She needed to prove she was the enlightened one, not the usurper. Her most ambitious project was the Nakaz, or Great Instruction. This radical legal document, drafted by Catherine herself, drew on Enlightenment works. It argued for mitigating serfdom, ending torture, and establishing equality before the law. It was a mission statement for a modern, humane state, written by the autocrat herself. In 1767, she convened a massive legislative commission to put these ideas into action. Over 500 delegates from across the empire, nobles, merchants, peasants, gathered to draft a new legal code. It was a grand gesture of consultative government designed to broadcast her enlightened intentions to Europe. However, The commission failed to produce a legal code. The ideals of the Nakaj shattered against Russian realities. Delegates were divided by class interests. Nobles refused to give up serf ownership. The assembly dissolved without passing significant laws. Catherine learned that her ideas were too liberal for the nobility she depended on for power. How does a usurper prove her enlightenment? She builds a culture. Catherine understood that soft power art, architecture, and philosophy was crucial in establishing Russia as a civilized European power. She aimed to rival the courts of Paris and Vienna, making St. Petersburg the new Rome. Catherine was a voracious art collector. She acquired thousands of paintings and sculptures, buying entire collections from impoverished aristocrats, such as the famous Walpole collection from England. This hobby became a state project, forming the foundation of the Hermitage Museum. The Winter Palace was transformed into a repository of culture. She also commissioned the bronze horseman statue of Peter the Great, visually linking her reign to his legacy. She championed female education, a revolutionary concept in Russia. In 1764, she founded the Smolny Institute for Noble Maidens, a state-sponsored school teaching literature, science, and languages. It was designed to create a generation of enlightened women who would modernize Russian society from within the family unit. She cultivated a republic of letters, corresponding with Enlightenment minds like Voltaire. These letters were a public relations campaign, crafting her image as a modern liberal ruler. She ensured the intellectual superstars of the day sang her praises, cementing her reputation as the Great. She even led by example in science, becoming the first person in Russia to be inoculated against smallpox by Thomas Dimsdale. A bold risk that showcased her progressive mindset and encouraged her subjects to do the same. But as Catherine dreamed of reform, a terrifying ghost returned. The reality for millions of serfs was brutal oppression. That simmering rage was about to explode in the most violent rebellion Russia had ever seen, threatening to tear the social fabric apart. A charismatic Cossack named Yemelyan Pugachev ignited a rebellion on the frontier. In a move of audacious genius, he claimed to be the surviving Tsar Peter III, returned to save his people from the godless Catherine. This narrative tapped into the peasant belief in a good Tsar, giving the uprising dangerous legitimacy that terrified the superstitious peasantry and the secular court alike. The rebellion swelled into a massive peasant war. Serfs, Cossacks, and minorities flocked to Pugachev's banner. He promised freedom from serfdom and the extermination of the nobility. The rebellion was characterized by extreme brutality, burning estates and killing nobles, terrifying the aristocracy. Catherine initially underestimated the threat, but soon realized the danger when major cities were besieged. The rebellion raged for over a year, threatening Catherine's throne. Eventually, the imperial army's superior training, led by generals like Suvorov, prevailed. Pugachev was betrayed, captured, and publicly executed in Moscow. This savage execution was a warning to any who dared challenge the state. This event was the trauma of Catherine's reign. The bloody anarchy eclipsed her liberal dreams. Her reforming zeal died. In response, she abandoned social reform and tightened the chains of serfdom, granting nobles more power over their property to ensure their loyalty. The golden age of the nobility became the dark age of the serf. Russia was a vast land empire, but it was frozen. Its northern ports were icebound for half the year, crippling trade. To become a global power, Catherine knew Russia needed a warm water port, an ice-free gateway to the southern seas. Her target was the Black Sea, a Turkish lake controlled by the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans and Crimean Tatars used the coast to launch slave raids into Russia. To achieve her goal, Catherine had to break Ottoman power, a task that had eluded her predecessors. She launched 2 successful Russo-Turkish wars. These full-scale conflicts tested her military. Her armies, led by commanders like Potemkin and Suvorov, crushed Ottoman forces on land, while her new Black Sea Fleet dismantled the Ottoman navy at battles like Kesma. where the Turkish fleet was burned in a single night of victory celebrated across Europe. The 1774 Treaty of Kaçakçı-Kaçarcı was a massive victory, giving Russia footholds on the Black Sea and protecting the Crimean Khanate. In 1783, she annexed the Crimea, a geopolitical masterstroke that secured Russia's southern flank and opened the fertile steppes to settlement. Russia finally had its warm water port. The imperial eagle spread its wings south. Catherine ordered the construction of Sevastopol, home of the Black Sea Fleet. This allowed Russia to project influence into the Mediterranean, a strategic reality relevant to this day. She even conceived the Greek project, an ambition to expel the Ottomans from Europe entirely. What happens when ruthless empires border a weak one? They erase it. This was the fate of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and Catherine was the architect. This act of political cynicism became a defining legacy, proving her enlightenment did not extend to neighbor sovereignty. She conspired with Russia's rivals, Prussia and Austria. The three crown vultures put aside differences to feast on Poland. It was a cynical alignment, satisfying territorial ambitions and utilizing their weakness to carve up the buffer state between them. In three partitions, the powers systematically took massive slices of Poland. Justified under thin pretexts of restoring order, the Polish people were powerless against the combined might of three empires. Catherine ruthlessly crushed the resistance, sending Suvorov to capture Warsaw. By 1795, Poland vanished from the map. It would not exist again for 123 years. For Catherine, it was a success, eliminating a troublesome neighbor and adding millions of subjects and vast territories to her empire, pushing Russia's borders deep into Central Europe. Catherine was famous for her lovers, but this obscures a deeper truth. She had many favorites, but only one true partner in power: Gregory Potemkin. He was as brilliant, flamboyant, and indispensable as Catherine herself. Potemkin was a statesman, arguably her co-ruler. Rumors persist they were secretly married. A soldier, diplomat, and builder. Their relationship was a mix of passion and politics. Even after their affair ended, their partnership remained the bedrock of the state, and he continued to vet future lovers for her. He was the architect of her southern expansion. As governor of New Russia, he governed the region like a kingdom, founding cities and the naval base of Sevastopol. He turned Catherine's vision of a southern empire into demographic and economic reality. He is remembered for the Potemkin villages' allegedly fake facades built to fool the Empress during her Crimean tour. While he stage-managed the tour, the fake villages' story is largely a myth. The tour was a massive propaganda victory showcasing Russia's newfound power and civilization to Europe. Their partnership defined the most successful period of her reign. His sudden death in 1791 devastated her. "I have no one left to lean on," she wrote. With him, a part of her energy died, leaving her to face the storms of the 1790s alone. The Enlightenment ideas Catherine championed soon exploded into the French Revolution. As the French monarchy crumbled, the philosopher queen was overcome with terror. The revolution was not a dream. It was a nightmare. The French Revolution of 1789 shattered Catherine's worldview. She saw the execution of Louis XVI as an existential threat to all monarchs. This was chaos, a plague she was determined to stop from spreading to Russia. The philosopher queen vanished, replaced by a reactionary autocrat. She imposed strict censorship, burning books she once praised. She banned French publications and shut down discussion of revolutionary ideas she now saw as poison. Her turn was personified in her treatment of author Alexander Radashev. When he published a book describing the horrors of serfdom using Enlightenment language, she was enraged. She exiled him to Siberia, sending a chilling message that intellectual inquiry was over. Her fear of revolution reversed her life's work. The enlightened Empress now ruled through censorship and suppression. Her goal was no longer to reform Russia, but to insulate it from liberty. After 34 years, the Iron Empress had one last political move: disinheriting her son. This act demonstrated her commitment to the state over family, defining the chaos after her death. She despised her son, Paul, considering him unstable and obsessed with the Prussian militarism that destroyed his father. She feared he would undo her work. She plotted to bypass him and name her grandson Alexander as successor, but she ran out of time. On November 17, 1796, Catherine collapsed from a stroke. She had been the picture of health, but the end came swiftly. She lingered unconscious for a day. She died on November 18th. Paul immediately seized power, destroying her papers and securing the throne in a moment of absolute state panic and confusion. Her final plot had failed. What is her legacy? Was she an enlightened philosopher who brought Russia into the modern age? A patron of arts and sciences who created a golden age? Or was she a ruthless tyrant, a usurper who built a glittering empire on the brutal, unbreakable backs of millions of enslaved serfs? The answer, like the woman herself, is a profound and complex yes to both. Her 34-year reign is, without question, called Russia's Golden Age. She expanded the empire by 200,000 square miles, securing the Black Sea and vast territories. She achieved the goals Peter the Great dreamed of, making Russia a global power. The population nearly doubled during her reign. She founded the Hermitage Museum, championed education, and promoted science. She was a builder who left Russia vastly more developed, cultured, and formidable than she found it. But this glittering enlightenment was not for everyone. It was a golden age for the nobility, but a dark age for the peasantry. She strengthened and expanded the brutal system of serfdom, condemning millions to a life of chattel slavery. Catherine remains a paradox, the enlightened despot. She was an intellectual who crushed dissent. She was the German outsider who became more Russian than the Russians, dragging a broken empire onto the world stage.